mean, the cemetery is called Chief James Sapulpa Cemetery.
That's right, it does. So,
So
hey guys, it's Micah from Sapulpa Times, and speaking of Sapulpa, we're talking about the man himself right now, and the name and everything. So, welcome. We've got Kirby Davis here. Welcome back to
howdy.
the show, Kirby.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
glad to
you.
have you back.
I appreciate it.
So I just recently finished book two of The Great Beckoning, which I just want to point out, fantastic title. I really do love that title, The Great Beckoning. And we explained kind of why you got that title the first time we had you. But just finished book two. If you haven't gotten these yet, they are available on Amazon. Can you get them elsewhere?
They're available at the two publishers, which is this Sapulpa Historical Society and their museum,
Okay.
and then Sapulpa Main Street. And very shortly, they will be available at the Root Cellar,
Okay.
and also they might be available shortly at Gasoline Alley Classics.
Oh, great. Okay.
So
Lots of different retailers getting involved in there. That's
yes,
well, a couple of
but
them.
Amazon is the primary location if you go online. So,
Okay. Good to know. Okay. Well, so if you haven't gotten your set of these books yet, I'd highly recommend you go get them. What I love about them, just kind of sidestep here, is they are an easy read. They're not. I don't know if exhaustive is the right word. They're thorough. I think they're a very good informational read, but they're not a hard read. It's not like picking up a giant, 500-page book.
well, that's part of. I wrote them intentionally that way, not to be an academic historical log, but to be something that you could pick up and enjoy with a casual style. In fact, I was asked, this whole book originated because Bryn Fowler with Spulpa Main Street, as I was collecting the stones for Sepulpa's great Route 66 giveaway,
Uh-huh.
she casually mentioned how one thing she would like to do for the centennial was produce a book about Sepulpa and Route 66. And as
You just
God
happen to
would
be at the
have it,
table when that.
David Reed had been having me research for Reed Architecture Interiors several issues involving Route 66 for his work with the city. So I casually told her, well, I can do that.
Good.
And after a little bit of thought, she trusted me to do that, and David did too. And so I tackled the two books. We went to the Historical Society because we needed art. We needed people who had photos with the copyright. And I thought, well, that's a logical, option. So I went to Rachel at the Historical Society and asked her if we could use their photos. And she said, sure, but would you make the book also about Sepulpa and its birth? I thought, well, that fits into what we're doing. So sure, I
Yeah.
did. And it broke into two books because we thought that was the easiest way to handle the whole money issue of royalties. One published by the Historical Society, one published by Spokane Main Street. So the Historical Society got book one, which is about the basic founding of Sapulpa on the Ozark Trail, which ended up becoming Route
Yep,
66.
that was the precursor. Yep.
And then Main Street got the book two about Route 66, which is what they wanted. So
Which
there
makes
we
a
are.
lot. I mean, that's what makes sense because Route 66 is what runs right through downtown. Main Street, of course, is dedicated to the preservation of the historic downtown. If you haven't seen it, I did show the graphic here, but it's a fantastic book. And you get the blue. I don't know, did the red and the blue make a? Did you choose those colors
That
intentionally,
was,
or
well, in theory. I first started with two shades of red, just because I liked the way the gold looked against the red.
yeah?
And then it was reminded to me that, if we did blue, we get Sapulpa High School colors. And then it was reminded to me, as we have in the book, that this is the 250th anniversary of the United States. So if you look at the
So
primary colors of the two books together, it's red, white, and blue,
that makes sense then. Okay,
and some black.
learning something. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Um, Well, okay, so what I also we were just talking about this before we went live. The first book, like you said, talks about it actually goes all the way back to the Native Americans coming to
Covering the
the
Maquoketa
area.
tribe,
Yeah, and then how
1720.
Sapulpa got started, and then through the first beginning years of Sapulpa, and then you lay heavily into the railroad, and then it book one kind of ends with what we call the Great Divorce of 1928, which I guess is the phrase you coined, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, it was. The railroad is important because without the
it is.
railroad, the modern town would not be what it is.
That's right.
And the railroad not only was one that set up the depot, which set up the incorporation or the plan for the town. The corporation took another decade. But the railroad is also the one that followed the Ozark Trail, the natural path, became the largest employer, set up the district office here, and branched off with lines going eventually to Oklahoma City, but also south to Texas. And, was the heartbeat of this community for its first, if you go back to the 1880s when they came through, it was the heartbeat of this community for almost 50 years. Not just the largest employer, largest contributor, it was everything was built around the railroad.
Hmm.
And when that stopped with what I call the Great Divorce of
1928,
1928,
which there is, I guess, some debate about when
well,
that really was, but 1928 really seemed to be
the process
a good,
started, years before.
right?
Could have happened during the World War I era, but it didn't. And so, and then the 28 is the fact that that's when the legal battle really hit its head. But when it went to the Supreme Court so many times, but the final time in December of 28, arguably the Supreme Court didn't release its decision until the very, I think, January 2nd of 29. So, I mean,
I
if you
think
want to be a
28's good.
technicality person,
Yeah.
but I think 28 is when everyone realized, you know, everything was on the line. And going through a year of silence from that rail yard must have been so shocking every day it continued for the people living at that time when they'd been used to all this commotion and for decades. It must have been an amazing period and a hurt
Um,
and a difficult period.
yeah, that I was going to say amazing and difficult is probably a good way to kind of phrase it
And if you think
because
about it, right after that came the stock market crash,
I was
the
literally about to
depression,
say that. Yeah, I mean, it was the beginning of like the
a very hard time.
dark period of the entire country. But of course, Sapulpa and this part of the country was hit with the Great Depression and then the Dust Bowl and everything else, and then the 15% of our state's population that uh, fled the state to
Yeah.
California and greener pastures, so to speak. But
That takes us right into book two because in the middle of all that was the development of Route 66,
mhm,
which for many people, even during those dark days, I mean, so many of the people evaded the Dust Bowl and the Depression by taking Route 66 west, hoping to find something in California.
right,
You know, and
and it
and
wasn't always the
it,
case.
no, I mean, if you'll, as it was coined in the book and in the film, the term Okie, a very derogatory term which people hated up into
At the
my
time,
high school era.
yeah,
In the 70s, it was still something you didn't say.
right.
And that was an evolution from that whole period and from Route 66 to some degree, primarily from the Californians who used it, to put down the influx of immigrant Oklahomans. Arkansas people had a similar term, Arkies. And
Uh,
it was a
kind of forget that,
difficult,
but
difficult time.
it sure was. Okay, well, before we get into which the book does talk about the difficult dark period that the nation and the town was going through in that time. But I really like book two picks up, just like you did in book one, where you backtracked a little bit. Book two, you also backtracked a little bit, and instead of starting with the Great Divorce, you actually talked about the creation of the automobile.
Well, and the influx of the automobile, and as it
Okay.
became a part of society, yeah, you have to. Part of it comes from you have to assume that not everyone has read book one first. I mean, you want them to, but you have to assume that someone may just start with book two. So therefore, you have to lay the groundwork for why the automobile was important and the impact it had, as in highways.
Hmm.
Without the highways, the automobile would be nothing. Even with today's modern tires, that's pretty much true. So you had to go back to, in my case, 1905, when at the first time the city started looking at when they handled the roads, making them accommodate the motorless carriage,
Hmm.
which was just a toy for the rich at that time, but it was
At the
still
time.
important enough that the city built their roads to help accommodate it. And those weak tires, I mean, that you had to protect. And it was just a few years, 1908, when the Model T comes out, and suddenly, over the next 5 to 10 years, the Model T proves the automobile is not a fluke. It's an affordable means of transportation that everyone can use, and it changed everything.
Hmm.
And so Sapulpa was ahead of its time in some ways by recognizing that we need to accommodate this mode of transportation in our city. It was also an economic way of competing with the cities around you. Everyone wanted to attract business, attract residents, and one way they did that was through quality infrastructure. If you look at the roads being better here, it's more likely people might live there. And
Right.
especially since you have this big, fast-growing railroad depot bringing people in constantly, the first way you could expose them to the quality of your town is through the roads and the sidewalks.
Okay, so you touched on something I wanted to bring up. I really like that you make it a point in this book about talking about how Route 66, especially, but the highway system of sorts, it really kind of connected people in a way that they hadn't been able to connect before. And I think you mentioned that the farmer was no longer isolated like they were. They could come to town. And that's, in fact, that's when we really saw Sapulpa, I think simultaneously grow, but then also like there were a lot of fears there because people could now leave Sapulpa easily and go to Tulsa, and
Well, that's
the
it.
town
We're
kind of built around
mixing
that.
trends over a couple of decades there, but on
Yeah.
the big picture, yeah, that's exactly right. Keep in mind that when Sapulpa started, one reason why it was when Sapulpa really started in the late 1890s, when the railroad connection was made to Oklahoma City, and the Frisco built the connection south to Texas. And they put a division point in Sapulpa because it was going to be the hub of that transit.
Hmm.
Sapulpa became their second busiest stop, and they started having train activity going, east, west, south at a very hectic pace. And the rail yard grew from one line to two lines to 14 lines over a decade. It was the kind of thing at that point. Sapulpa was the nation's second fastest growing city, a stat that continued through much of the 1910s, which explains why someone from Tulsa might say, "Hey, we ought to get that business here," or
Yeah.
and why someone like Bristow might argue about getting the county seat because they realized that how valuable those jobs were, and Sapulpa already had all this stuff. Why, we got to try to get what we can at Bristow. And indeed, many of the arguments for expanding the highways were to connect everyone. The people in Bristow saw the benefits of Sapulpa being connected to Tulsa, and they wanted it too.
Yeah.
In fact, they wanted it to go all the way to Oklahoma City, so they had all that traffic going back and forth. What you were talking about, I mean, is a simple matter of time. Traveling by horse or horse and buggy was a big step up from the days when you were walking. But compared to the train, suddenly in the train, you could travel halfway across the nation in a week,
Right. Yeah.
as opposed to months with the horse or with the ship. Now, with the car, it took time to get the transmission, the engine, the tires, all the systems up to that level. But by the time Route 66 was already approved, and 2 years later, Edsel Ford was talking about how their cars could safely travel 65 miles an hour over time. Now, of course, he was wrong because yes, they could do that, but the highways didn't exist for that in our part of the country
There
anyway.
was a hard. It was hard to even get to that speed. Right.
You'd be going awfully bumpy on a gravel road at 65 miles an hour.
Yes, you would.
As he was talking about a paved road, yes, it could be very safe. But getting to that paved road, we were behind parts of the country in doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
our state didn't form until 1907, so naturally we were behind. It, but it came rather rapidly, if you think about it. By 1938, Route 66 was paved all the way across the country, and that was during the Depression.
Hmm.
It depended a lot on what FDR did with his New Deal, the Works Progress Mission, the Civil Civilian Corps, other things. But still, to get it done, 2,000 some miles, 2,400 some miles, all concrete, That was quite a deal,
Yeah, it
you know,
was.
and it, you know, on a road like that, of course, the early roads drew their own complaints too. They were only, each lane was only 9 feet across.
Right, that ribbon
Yeah.
highway. Yeah.
I mean, they had no shoulder, and they, you know, they were just now learning how to handle truck suspension, so they distributed the weight and didn't put undue burdens on the pavement, how it would survive over time, and all that kind of stuff that we take for granted now.
Right. It's funny because that was something that became pretty evident as I'm reading this. I'm like, man, all of these things that you don't even think about now. It's nothing for us to get on the road and just, crank it right up to 65, or we're mad if we can't go the speed limit, if traffic is backed up. And in fact, I'll bring that up now because you talked about part of the success of the Route 66 was actually um, I guess almost its downfall in the sense that, like, from the very beginning, with like bumper to bumper traffic for a while, you talked about businesses actually sending out their workers and stuff to take orders.
You're talking about the very first concrete road
Yeah.
that was finished between Tulsa and Sapulpa. Yeah, they talked about that. Pete Egan wrote about that in his books. It was covered by the local papers. It was back then, road travel, even a short trip like that, was an adventure. And people downtown, even though some of them, like the drugstores with their drink counters and ice cream counters, took
Yeah.
advantage of that.
Yeah.
You know, hiring runners just for the day to go out and send people to the stop cars and get them drinks. The Harvey House, you know, which was the railroad's big restaurant in Sapulpa,
Hmm.
had supposedly its biggest day in years that day. At the same time, they realized with fear that if people really enjoy that kind of travel despite the traffic, you know, might start losing customers to
To
Tulsa.
Tulsa.
They
Yeah.
might start driving there, which has the bigger, even back then, had a bigger selection, more competitive prices because they had more competition. And they were worried then about what impact this would have on their commerce, on their sales tax, on businesses. Would they have another round of losing them again? And keep in mind that was even before Route 66 was formally approved. That was before the Frisco left. So at
Okay. So
that
the
stage, they were
428.
already realizing not only that the railroad was threatened,
Hmm.
but that their lives and their whole concept was threatened. Let's back up a tiny bit. You know, at that time, Sapulpa was the county seat, and all these little towns around it, most people came once a week to Sapulpa to shop. So even when times are bad, you could always count on the farmers, the people in Kiefer or Kellyville or whatever, driving in at least once a week to Sapulpa to get their groceries, to get what clothes they needed, you know, to maybe go see the dentist if they had to, you know, and all that kind of stuff. Sapulpa had a constant flow of cash, which, as you know, on the economic level, on the city tax level, cash flow is vital.
Right. It's important.
And even during the Depression, Sapulpa had this to fall back on. Even after they lost the Frisco, they had this to fall back on. But even that early, with all the difficulties of driving, as we mentioned, the visionary ones among them, started thinking, this could be a problem down the road. And it didn't take long for these highway networks to form. And indeed, many towns wanted them to form because they realized the advantages of having a highway coming through your town. They realized, even though it was expensive, they realized the value of concrete. They realized the value of the trucking system coming through. The value, I mean, at that time, it wasn't just transport, it was all the businesses brought, whether it was from filling stations selling gas, tire stations selling tires, mechanics selling, even the people that did what people hated to see, you know, the wrecking yards and that. These were vital back then and to some degree today for getting parts for when a car broke down. I
Yeah.
mean, back then, the whole idea of having whole inventories that you just go back and get a spark plug or whatever, you know, that was all coming. But getting one off
Hadn't
a
really
broken
arrived at
down
that
car,
point.
it took time to all
Yeah.
build, you know, and it's amazing how many little factors there were.
And well, so you kind of touched on something here that I wanted to bring back around, and I guess I'll start it by talking about the filling stations and stuff. So this was also a period, and I'm also I just finished your book, so now I'm reading Route 66 by Michael Wallace, which
Great
is like
book.
the
Great book.
definitive, right?
He has a
Uh,
new edition coming out this fall.
oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I
Is
don't know
it?
if there's gonna be any major additions to the book, but it's being republished. It was supposed to be in May. Now I think it's August when it's coming out.
Okay.
But yeah, you can
I may
watch
have to
for it.
get another edition from here. But uh, anyway, so in that one, he talks a little bit about how this was really the period where you started seeing like the franchise concept really come into its own, especially with our filling stations, Phillips 66, Texaco,
In
and
many ways, those companies are the ones that really launched it in a national way.
yeah,
They came up with the idea of having buildings that all look the same. Even down from the uniforms the mechanics wore
hmm
to the training they had to have to the cleanliness of the bathrooms. And it's funny, once you realize that, you can start looking at the old photos, and they nearly all had signs out front about how clean their bathrooms were,
yeah,
which was a vital thing for people crossing, even especially great distances, but even short distances. You have to make bathroom stops
right,
and you want them to be clean. So that would advertise this, and they made no money off their bathrooms. But if you stopped, then you might buy a Coke, you might buy a pack of gum, you might even fill your car up with gas.
right,
That's where their money came from, and that's all where the other services came from that filling stations used to do so prevalently. Clean your windshield, check your oil,
yeah, all of
check
it
your
full
tires,
service.
which back then, tire pressure, fresh, the oil level, the radiator level, those were all vital.
hmm
We take for granted today because the engines are so efficient. But back then, that was incredibly vital, and they provided all that for free. Of course, they'd make money if they had to put a tank of oil in your car,
hmm
but they were looking for ways to do that. So
Yeah, and the clean bathrooms and things like that would get you to come back, right? I mean, if you pass through that way again, you'll remember that
And nearly
for
every
sure.
filling station had a restaurant pop up beside it. Because if you're going to stop there and your car needs work, you need a place to go sit down, eat, drink coffee.
Yeah,
And
get
then
a little bit
from
to
there came the hotel, motel, and
one
and
thing always led
Howard
to another.
Johnson's and chains like that came, from that era. It was Best Western, Holiday Inn.
Man, I was actually looking at some old postcards yesterday of how many of these motor court hotels Sapulpa actually used to have. We had a few. For a town that doesn't have a single hotel these days, we used to have quite a few. We'll have to talk more about that at some point when we're doing the research on it. But getting back to the franchising thing I do you feel like in one way, because then later on in the book you talk about how I guess ultimately the idea of the franchise and then corporations and Walmart comes to town, and the effect that that has on the businesses downtown, and how the town really pulled together before Walmart, but after the railroad, they did like these dollar a day programs, and every dollar spent in Sapulpa meant more for your community. And talk a little bit about that, because you spent a good chunk of the book on that. I felt like.
Well, one thing, keep in mind that these books were meant not just to be about the Ozark Trail or Route 66 or the Frisco Railroad. Ultimately, they're using Sapulpa as our lens to look at all these issues,
Right. Yeah.
and downtown Sapulpa as the focal point, because that was the started as the heart of Sapulpa and it remained the heart into the 60s. There's where we get to what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that slow decline of downtown actually started, you could argue, I would argue. I mean, the Frisco leaving was obviously a big shudder, but they overcame that. The Depression, a difficulty, the population growth slows to a crawl, but they survived that. World War II bound them together. We won that.
hmm
All the soldiers come back home, and we're suddenly realize we're the only unbombed industrial nation in the world. And even though there were difficulties, such as anytime you go to a post war economy and transitions like that, and all these people come back to the workforce, we were still ultimately one of the most prosperous nations history's ever seen for well over a decade. And that led to a lot of people deciding they wanted a better life for themselves than what they had before the war. It meant a lot of people were taking to the roads, going west to find a new place like California. A lot of people leaving their rural homes to get into urban areas, find
Mhm.
better jobs, better places to live. Sapulpa was in the middle of that because it is, technically because of the highways, it was a rural area, but it was also the hub of that rural area.
Yeah.
And it was on the road that was taking people west. A lot of benefits from all of that. But at the same time, for 20 some years, people have been debating should this traffic go through towns? It's a big headache for downtown when you have all these people who are doing nothing but driving through.
Yeah.
There are accidents that happen. People get hit, by these trucks. It causes backups at stop signs, and the train comes by, it backs up we still have that issue. And a lot of people are
That's true.
wondering,
That's
oh,
not
why
something
don't
to
we
change.
just route this traffic around town, make it easier for them, faster for the transit to go? Oklahoma debated that for a long time, and that's where Sapulpa's downturn arguably started with the turnpikes.
Okay.
Approved in the late 40s, built in an amazingly fast time in the early 50s. And suddenly, this turnpike from Oklahoma City to Tulsa bypasses Sapulpa. And a fair amount of Route 66 traffic makes a jump immediately from driving the old road with all its stops and all of its corners and all its, you decaying concrete now, to the
When was
turnpike.
this was 50?
53 was when it's
53.
finished.
Okay.
It was so
County
successful, it
Turnpike.
was paid off in less than 3 years. And by 55, if I got my date right, the state decided, hey, let's expand the OTA. We'll build three more turnpikes, and instead of turning it over free to the public after it's done, which was the original plan, we'll keep charging fees and using this to build still more turnpikes. Because at that time, the automobile was definitely dominant, but less than 30%, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, less than 25% of Oklahoma highways were paved. And the state had a hard time raising those funds because Oklahoma's always been a low tax state.
Hmm.
And you couldn't count on the federal government, you thought, because every time you did something like World War II or the Korean War might come up and the funds get drained down.
Yeah.
You can't even afford from federal funds to repair the roads, much less build ones. The turnpikes and furthermore, only people using the turnpikes were paying for them. So this is not a burden on Bartlesville to where they have to pay for this road connecting Oklahoma City and Tulsa. It's, only the people using it are paying for it.
Right.
And furthermore, you raise the rates on commercial traffic and they will pay for most of it. And they welcomed the idea, as we saw with the highway paying for itself in 2 years.
Couple of years. Yeah.
So the sad thing for Sapulpa was, well, the next turnpike they built connects Tulsa to Missouri, bypassing still more Route 66.
Yeah.
And then they build the connector through Tulsa. At the same time, what had been threatened many times in the previous 20 some years gets done. They connect Highway 75 from Glenpool to Tulsa,
Yeah.
make Sapulpa an alternate.
Which is something they had talked about. You just said that. Yeah, that actually been talked about for a good couple decades, right?
Yes, but well, they were threats
They
because,
were threatening it because they weren't getting the improvement that they wanted to see in a timely manner.
well, the issue is, absolutely right. But the issue is at that time of the game in the 20s and 30s, it wasn't the funding for this stuff was difficult. So it wasn't just the feds, it wasn't just the state, it wasn't just the city or county. A lot of times the people who owned the property that the road went down had to pay for part of the construction. And as they kept increasing the rate loads and kept demanding more concrete, kept putting in sewer systems because you had to drain the water off and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
the expenses faced on those property owners were difficult, especially in the Depression. And many of them resisted and fought it through the courts or the local government. And so that's why, for example, one segment of Sapulpa on Mission, that was used both by 75 and Route 66, didn't get paid for years, even though they had thought it was going to be. The property owners kept fighting it. And it was arguably one of the last spots on Route 66 in Oklahoma to get paved. But that's again part of the sharing of the costs. By the 50s, the Turnpike Authority took over all of that because they were paying for the road's construction. And then they were charging the fees to those who used it. It worked. I mean, the road construction, which was built in an amazing time, was paid off in an even faster time.
Hmm.
So they decide to build more. And then they have to do the connector. And in doing that connector and in paving 75, suddenly the people in Creek County, the people even in Sapulpa, find it's almost as easy to drive to Tulsa to shop as it is to drive downtown. And it's more fun. You can make a day of it. You can go out there, hey, let's eat, let's enjoy the drive. Let's listen to the radio. Let's go fast. Let's just that's the era when car hops and drive-ins and motor vehicles were wonderful and wonderfully a part of Americana. And indeed, Detroit, one reason why this helped also bring the downfall of Route 66, because Detroit through the late 40s and 50s back on his wheels after World War II,
Hmm.
the cars kept getting wider, longer, heavier, faster. They could go longer distances on a tank of gas. They were cheaper to run. And on that little road that did not grow with the cars, the only
Right.
lane's only 9 feet wide. When your car is suddenly 7 feet wide, that
A
is
lot of room.
suddenly your curves become a real problem, or trying to miss a pit hole or trying to see where the road's decayed off and you don't want to go over that, and trucks are the same way, with the road beds. I mean, in the beds, you have things back there. You don't like bouncing over potholes or ridges in the concrete and that you want to protect the stuff that you're carrying. The
True.
new highways, the wider highways were everyone wanted that.
That's why they became more preferable, I guess, to the
And
old Route
people love the
66.
driving experience. They
Yeah.
always have. Just like they loved riding their horse, which was alive and more than a pet, more than a companion.
Hmm.
The car, people treated the car that way, even though it was never responded that way. I mean, the whole idea of keeping your car polished, keeping your glass clean, updating your car every 5 years. You'd never do that to your horse, but you want to keep up with technology. You want to keep up with appearances. You get a ding in that car, you're madder than anything.
Yeah.
And that was that whole era of a fun age, but also an age that changed Sapulpa, all the little towns around it. It took out the cash flow that we talked about.
Hmm.
It brought a sales tax decline. It did bring some people to move here because with the highways came the suburbia trend.
Right.
But that also worked in reverse because it led people to start working other places. And the big issue again was their shopping other places.
Yeah.
You know,
They could
it's
now commute to their job and then live
and
at the point.
suburbia even hit Sapulpa in the fact that, hey, we could build a house out in the country and we can still be downtown in 5, 10 minutes.
Hmm.
We the whole idea of city limits and where to live, where it everything changed. It took time for that to happen, but it happened, and a lot of people saw it coming.
Yeah, and I was impressed with how well people saw it coming, especially like our downtown merchants and stuff. Um, And like I said, you dedicated at least a portion of the book to talking about like the dollar deals, and you did really great research. I mean, the businesses that I had forgotten. I mean, I'm not old enough to have been here when they were here, but you hear about them and Newberry's and w- uh, Cat's department store and all the others there, and it's a really
Yes.
good read just for that kind of stuff, honestly. But
Well, I enjoyed that too, and the chapter you're referring to is one that focuses just on the year 1960, which was
yeah.
such a pivotal year. But it was in my way for the book. It was a way of perhaps for the first time bringing forward just what Sapulpa was and what downtown was for that era when it was at its arguably its height. Even though the railroad is long gone, you could argue, obviously, that from that period of fast growth from 1900 to 1925, that was Pulpa's heyday.
Hmm.
And for that culture, it was. But to have survived that downturn, depression, and then to pick itself back up as the whole country did after World War II.
Right.
A lot of times when we remember the romantic days, partly because of just age and culture and that, but we remember those days of the 50s and
50s. Yeah.
60s, when you had um, Christmases. The one thing I like to bring forward, when you have Christmases, when people will just window shop, and they'd go to the turkey drawings over at the corner and listen to the choirs sing and drink hot chocolate and just being together, seeing everyone. But it would be a romantic time just to be arm in arm with your loved one and stroll through your downtown environment. While this happened many times through the year, it was Christmas that we remember.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
the Christmas of that era of 1960, captured it so well. Yeah, it was so that I devoted a whole chapter to that to show what Sapulpa was like before the changes that we discussed really happened.
Yeah. When
Yeah,
Walmart came to town, I think
Walmart
was kind of the big one,
74
right? Yeah.
drained so much business out. That was not just Sapulpa, that was pretty
That was
much
everybody.
every town
Yeah.
across. And Walmart grew slowly from Arkansas to Oklahoma and then other states until it was nationwide and then almost worldwide. That happened pretty much everywhere over a 50-year period. And it took the internet to present a real challenge to Walmart, and in many ways that you're talking about Amazon.
Yeah.
And Amazon's growth was slow too. Slowly from books into other products into, well, now they're an octopus into everything. And Walmart, I don't know if you realize it, but Walmart digitally is the same way. And of course, the biggest retailers in China, where they just basically copied Walmart.
Yeah.
So, and Amazon. So I mean, it's fascinating to look at where all but all the romantics of us who are old enough remember, and even those who aren't, remember the stories told because
About the romance of Christmas in downtown
and
Sapulpa.
that's partly
Yeah.
because of films and TV. We still enjoy watching the Andy Griffith Show or the Dick Van Dyke Show or all these things from that 50s 60s era that remind us of what life was in what was the perhaps most beloved era of Americana. Films, we think often maybe more back into the 40s, but the stage is pretty much the same. You know, it's by the 50s, and that's one thing the book brings up too. By the 50s, films, Hollywood were seeing the competition of television,
Hmm.
and they were going through issues of monopoly and being broken up and having their theater chains pulled away from them. And where was their revenue coming from? Getting more in line with, edgy stories, edgy,
Yeah.
filmy,
Adult drama stuff. Yeah.
changing technology with a widescreen, the Cimarron, stereo to quadrasonic,
Yeah. To
and
have it
as
in
you
color.
mentioned, getting more adult things that you couldn't see on TV.
Right.
And by 1960, that was a big issue for, Spolpa's uh, cinema and for the drive-in. And indeed, I didn't put this really in the book, but there were times the drive-in often featured films with, at that time, quite racy content. Never X's. X's didn't exist in 60, but they were getting close to that edge, with nudity and that. And Sepulpa had it at its drive-in.
The-
It was fascinating.
they had to find a way to compete, I guess.
It was
But
on
anyway,
weekends.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
They had by the 60s, by 1960, you could argue the drive-in movement was in the decline.
mhm.
And that was part of the issue. They were competing not with television, but with your theater. And of course, in Sepulpa's case, at that stage, this was a little early for that, but we were already foothold where the one screen theater was competing with the 2 or 4 screen. In the 70s, that would be a real issue. And then by the 80s, the multiplex. And then, of course, by the 90s, you started seeing cable really being a competition.
Yeah.
Started in the 80s.
And then
And then the internet.
Yeah, yeah, and then the internet.
And of course, VHS and DVDs through the 80s and 90s
Right.
into the 2000s.
Yeah, that was the big one, I think, that
Totally off the subject, but that's what
it
it's.
was.
It's all the same root issues what we saw in 1960 as
Yeah.
well.
Well, so one thing that stood out to me when I started reading about what happened to our department stores in downtown, especially after Walmart came, is like it seemed to have like a real domino effect. I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, but it seemed like all of these stores were gone in the span of a decade.
You could
And we're
argue
talking J.C.
15,
Penney, and
15, 17 years. Yeah,
yeah,
yes. Well, it was, and it was a time when a lot of people didn't know what to do. It was the era of urban renewal, which is one answer to that. But the answer in many cases was tear the old building down and build something that's more timely, more efficient, more elegant. But in many cases, they tear the building down and maybe not build anything at all.
yeah,
The preservationists who, well, we don't want to tear the building down. So we'll put this metal facade over the front, to
yeah.
hide the old stuff that's decaying that we can't afford to keep up. And, they thought it actually looked cool and timely for the time of
I
this
guess it did
age
for a
when
little while.
metal
Yeah,
was, but,
yeah.
it didn't look good very long if it did.
They're
And
all gone now, right? I mean,
well, a lot of that is, but if you look, for example, there's a few spots downtown where you don't see the old brick and mortar. You see some front put over it. Sometimes it's hidden with an awning. Sometimes it's just a finish, a metal plate or paint or whatever. But most of downtown that we still have. Now, a lot of people forget, and the books bring this out. And I wish one of my regrets in the books is I didn't point this out more. A lot of people forget that Dewey, for example, brick and mortar extended to Mission all the way across downtown, and then a little bit beyond the library.
yeah,
And we lost a lot of that.
we did. Yeah,
Now, thank the Lord that this 9 block area was protected and recognized rather early on in terms of these days. By 85, it was already a sad condition downtown, but the research started before then, and by 85, the Indian Council of Governments had helped produce a report which allowed us to get the historic district
on the
approved,
historic
although that took
registry.
another
Yeah,
10, 15 years.
yeah,
None of this stuff came easy, but it was a sad process. But if you think about it, the concept of business is cash flow. It is a critical mass. That's the problem with downtown right now. You need a critical mass of businesses that people want to shop at.
right.
If you only have a few, and if they're very good, they can survive. But if you only have a few, the difficulties you have is they might last until the honeymoon period is over and consumer takes them for granted. And then do they still have the loyal customer base, the cash flow that allows them to survive? We have a few that are done by Gasoline Alley Classics, looks like one.
Yeah,
Now that's fueled a lot by Route 66 traffic, not
yeah. I was going to
local
say that.
traffic.
Yeah,
But we have some others that, we can look at that look to be survivalists, even prospering. We need more of them, obviously. But
we
that
do.
was a struggle in the Walmart era. Walmart had the inventory. It restocked it quickly. It had super low prices, even on a level that challenged Tulsa, because it had a very strong structure built by Sam Walton, and it constantly maintained itself and improved itself. So all the growth that it experienced only helped them keep prices lower and lower and lower and keep inventories better.
Yeah,
The downtown people had a much higher overhead. They had much more difficulty keeping their inventory up. Their costs were higher.
yeah,
They couldn't spread it over an entire chain that was growing with leaps and bounds like Walmart was. How can you expect them, unless they have extremely deep pockets or they have sugar daddies, if you remember that phrase, unless you had those conditions for you and you were determined to keep going, your option is inevitably to close. because you can't compete.
It's just, yeah, it's just bound to happen.
The only other option is to have something Walmart doesn't have. And in those days, that was hard. It's hard now, but in our artistic society, artisan society, our made in Oklahoma philosophy that people like to push, it's not as hard as it used to be, but it's still hard. Remember, Walmart started that way too. Walmart for 20 years proudly promoted itself as all of its products being made in America.
Yeah, that was,
It wasn't until NAFTA, 90s, NAFTA and other moves, and the idea that per capita people were making less money than their parents. People were more, we were gone from one income families to two income families to struggling with a two income family situation. The Walmart realized to keep ahead of certain products, they had to start outsourcing themselves to China primarily, Japan,
yeah.
Korea, people where labor was so inexpensive, you could make the product and ship it to the USA and still sell it for cheaper than what you could do in the
In the
USA.
United States, yeah. Now,
And Walmart made that leap in the 90s.
well, I wanted to ask, kind of, I feel like over the last maybe 5 to 10 years here in Sapulpa specifically, that we are seeing something of a resurgence, I think, of the downtown retail experience that I guess they used to have in the 60s into the 70s and stuff. I don't know if we'll ever reach that fever pitch that it hit back then, but um, why do you think that is? I'm sure that some of it has to do with the centennial of the Route 66 and things like that, but it also feels like people are they have a desire to move back into more urban areas, and I'm watching how people are like they kind of like the idea of living upstairs and working downstairs, like it was back in the day. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, there are many things behind that, and we're not there yet. Our critical mass is not there yet to be
Right.
a self-sustaining downtown. However, you have, I see a lot of movements like that, and there are a lot of issues behind it, whether it's from self-starters like Michael Jones, who came in, bought the building, did nearly all the work himself with a business concept that proved incredibly successful. He believed in, he shopped the entire Route 66 to find the location.
I didn't
Um,
know he did that, but
he
wow,
he was looking for
he
the
was committed.
he was looking for the right place to be with the lack of competition. He found that here. Then there are other people, as in, the contact group.
Hmm.
A Sapulpa native who succeeded in the world and brought her whole business back home because she believed in Sapulpa and has invested in Sapulpa. If you look at it in terms of just that issue, that is always the thing that drives a resurgence. People who believe and invest, devote their time, their energy to building something in this department. Michael did that. The Conte Group have done that. Reed Architecture and Interiors
Yeah,
did that.
that was another one that came to mind. Yeah.
And there are new ones. Will Berry has renovated two whole blocks now, along Hobson and with more planned. And some of the businesses that grew in his work, like the brewery, James Calley Brewing Company,
Yep.
dynamic success so far with something that is unique, not just to Sapulpa, but this region. Of course, the Conti Group did the same thing with the cookery and their work there. Waypoint, which is still a viable business in Sapulpa, just more under the radar, serving its needs for uh, uh, rental needs or meeting
Yeah,
groups
for
that and for
broadcasting
contact
and
groups work.
hmm
It takes that set of believers who are willing to put their skin in the game and work to see it through. It takes the volunteers, groups like the Chamber and Pulpa Main Street, to come in and help it all grow. And even before all that, it takes a city and a voter base that believes that they have an opportunity here, that believes they have something they want to save. I mean, you could argue that a lot of things we've seen would not have happened if the city had not proposed and the voters had not approved this $5 million redevelopment plan for downtown that built a north-south and an east-west uh, walkability environment, walking environment. There we go. That sounds better. But redoing Dewey, redoing the alleys so you could travel from Hobson to Lee
Hmm.
on your feet and enjoy it,
Yeah.
have all these different gathering places, putting the park there where the Herald used to be, making Dewey, look sparkling new in a way that everyone would want to come to. Uh, you would argue that many of these things may not have happened if that had not happened. And then, of course, the volunteers who believe in it and make it work. The Christmas shoot's a perfect example of what a city can accomplish when you gather around an idea and you have hundreds upon thousands of people willing to give their time to put together something that no one else has and to do it so well that in its very first year you grab national attention and you have a highly viewed network show broadcast from the center of your downtown.
Yeah.
You know that
It's amazing.
that is so many citizens, so many cities would give everything they had for the opportunities to claim that. And Sapulpa did it not just once, not just twice, three times. They took a break so that they could redo Dewey, but in redoing Dewey, they even made it easier to do the next Christmas shoot.
Yeah.
All the infrastructure is built in there. So, while we have all the volunteerism, all the blood, sweat, and the tears, and the will to do it, it's going to be a dynamic asset. And the issue is, when you are we going to be willing to do that? I mean, you could year round. I mean, we saw elements of how good that could be when would the chamber proceed to the route. We saw elements of that when Main Street brought in the national conference party
Hmm.
at the end of that. You know, you looked at that. If you walk through those events, you realize this is fantastic. Why can we not have this all year round? And then when you look at things like the road trip and the roads pit stops that they had on that one day through downtown.
The Great Race.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you saw, hey, all it took was a bunch of old cars driving through downtown and people came down. I mean, that tells you it does not take a great, huge expending of money to pull this off. It just makes, it just takes a community that wants to do it. And so what we need to do is reinstill this love of downtown, which everyone seems to have, but also put it to practice. Come downtown more often, shop downtown more often. The more people do that, the more businesses will open up. The more businesses open up, the more people will do that.
Yeah.
Add more events such as the things we used to love, like the choir singing downtown, or the band performances, or the parties, the fun trips just to enjoy, walking, looking in the windows, enjoying this thing that the city gave us. Um, it's a critical mass of things that come together and then thrive on their own. We're so close to that. We're not there yet. We're so close to that that it all it may take is just more people deciding to do it. Maybe groups like church parties or neighborhood reading clubs or those who love to see old cars. Maybe bring your old car downtown, Robin, just show it off. Just start, just decide it's something we want to do and do it.
Yeah, I love that. That's a hey, I mean, the opportunity is always there. That's one of the great things about this community is that there are plenty of opportunities to be that kind of person if you want to be.
The
And,
more people who do that, the more you'll see. I mean, a lot of the complaints you hear is like some of these businesses are only open 3, 4, 5 days a week.
right.
I guarantee you they would be open more if the traffic was here, if the cash flow was here. And there are a lot of businesses that offer things people could use and enjoy because we see it, during these events. How many people say, "We didn't know this was here. We didn't know this was
Yeah,
going on."
it happens every week, it feels like, but
It just takes that critical mass of public recognition and public decisions.
yeah. Well, this has been great. And believe it or not, even though we spent quite a bit of time talking about this, I mean, uh, we haven't, I feel like, barely scratched the surface of what these books are about. So, again, let's just plug them again. The Great Beckoning, book one and two are both out now. They've been on the bestseller list in Amazon.
Amazing.
And,
Yeah, they started almost immediately that way, and they've dropped off a little bit now, but they still percolate, as attention gets drawn to them. Amazon recently put book two on sale slightly during their Prime days, which is a sign that they believe in the book.
oh, that's great. I didn't
Yeah,
know that. Okay. Well,
it was
now
only
I
about a
would have done
quarter
this
off,
earlier.
but a quarter off is still a quarter
Hey,
off.
it's quarter off at the quarter off at
Yeah,
these times.
yeah.
But yeah, they're available at Amazon. They're also at Main Street and at the Historical Society
Yeah,
Museum,
you can
right?
buy them right now there.
Okay. And then hopefully they'll be at Gasoline Alley and
Well,
what
the
else
root
did you say?
cellars were,
Root
I
Cellar.
know
That's it.
they're on their way.
Okay. Root Cellar is
and
definitely coming.
and Michael's talked about it. Other places have talked about it too. I just don't circulate enough there to know whether indeed they're there or not. But
Okay.
but it just that's the joy of this. You see, because people can go buy it and put it in their stores all by themselves if they want to. It's only 9.99 at Amazon.
Yep.
So anyone we've seen a lot of local merchants, buy it, mark it up $15, still a very affordable price.
It is, yeah, and well worth the price at either of those price points, really. Highly recommend, guys, get them. Yeah, I think they will be a great addition to your collection.
Great
And
Christmas present.
yeah, even so, yeah, with Christmas presents and especially, I mean, again, we are right here in the thick of it with Route 66 Centennial, and honestly, I mean, it would have been good for Father's Day.
I've
They
been
were
wondering if the
passed on the
school
way.
might want them as textbooks, at some class level. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe
But they're
so.
affordable enough that they could pay.
They are. They're formal enough and they're informative enough too.
Oh,
And
great.
so, but again, going back to what I said in the beginning, they're an easy read, guys. So don't think that you're going to be picking up like a War and Peace style novel of sorts. It's going to be hard to get through. I guess I've never actually read that book, and now you know why. Because I like my books easy to read, which this one is. So thank you. But anyway, Kirby, thanks again for being here. This has been just a great time talking to you about this.
Thank you.
Thanks for writing these books. I know that was a tremendous endeavor, and I hope that you feel at the end that it was an endeavor worth undertaking.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I enjoyed it, and that's the best thing about any project, anything you work on,
Mhm.
But like Mary Poppins said, for every job that must be done, there's element of fun. You find the fun and snap the job's a game.
Yeah,
That's what, the
this
writing
became a
these was
game for you.
getting them done on time. Yeah, that was definitely a game which I failed at, quite honestly, but we still got them ultimately done in time for what we wanted to do.
Yeah, we
You
did.
know, and
We
it
come along at a good
I'm
time.
happy they turned out. And this is the topic for another meeting, but this is just the start. We're looking at, you know, hardcovers.
Okay.
We're talking about audio versions, um, not just an audible, but maybe a full sound, play type presentation.
Oh, neato. Okay.
And then
Yeah, we'll have to continue about that.
we have other things. If they get approved, I'll be love to come here and talk to you about them,
Okay.
and which will draw off the books.
Okay. We'll be sure to have you back then. I mean, obviously we'll have Kobe back. We like talking to him about his stuff and he knows his stuff. That's always good too, that he knows what
Thank
to
you.
talk about. So thank
Thank
you
you.
again, Kobe. We appreciate having you here.
Thank you for
And
having me.
I'm sure it won't be too long before we'll have you back. And
I appreciate it.
okay, guys. Thanks for tuning into the Time Loop Live. We'll see you again on the next episode. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. We'll see you.